Coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. House Democrats have unveiled a nearly final version of the health care reform bill ahead of Sunday's expected vote. Democratic leaders have yet to secure the 216 votes needed to approve the measure, which would extend coverage to more than 30 million people while forcing millions of Americans to buy private health insurance. At least 3 holdout lawmakers announced they would vote for the bill on Thursday, but Democrats are said to remain around 6 votes short. Promoting the measure in Washington, President Obama cited new estimates from the Independent Congressional Budget Office that the bill would help reduce the federal deficit.
This morning, a new analysis from the Congressional Budget Office concludes that the reform we seek would bring $1.3 trillion in deficit reduction over the next 2 decades. That makes this legislation the most significant effort to reduce deficits since the Balanced Budget Act in the 1990s. And this is but one virtue of a reform that will bring new accountability to the insurance industry and greater economic security to all Americans.
Obama spoke after the White House announced he would delay an overseas trip to remain in Washington for the vote. White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs said Obama will reschedule the visit to Indonesia and Australia for June.
The scheduling worked throughout the night when it became apparent that the bill wasn't going to post yesterday to see about moving the trip back. We looked through and pulled out what very little padding remained from having moved the trip from Thursday to Sunday. And unless we took off basically extremely early in the afternoon on Sunday, it wasn't going to be possible to do.
As the health care bill enters its final stages, the immigration reform debate could be seeing a resurgence on Capitol Hill. On Thursday, Democratic Senator Charles Schumer of New York and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina unveiled a bipartisan measure that would force undocumented workers to admit to breaking the law and require that workers carry biometric cards affirming their eligibility for employment. In a statement, President Obama called the proposal the basis for moving forward. The measure comes ahead of a major immigrant rights rally in Washington on Sunday, expected to draw thousands of people. The Obama administration's announced it'll send Special Envoy George Mitchell to Israel and the occupied territories in a bid to restart indirect talks. Mitchell's initial visit was canceled last week after Israel announced construction plans for 1,600 new homes in an East Jerusalem settlement. But on Thursday, the White House said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had made specific proposals that swayed administration officials to authorize Mitchell's return. It's unclear if Netanyahu agreed to the basic U.S. demand of canceling the settlement expansion, as details have not been released. The Washington Post reports Netanyahu offered only to delay construction by a few years, but not to cancel it outright. The apparent delay would come as part of a proposed policy under which Israel would continue to build settlements, but promise not to publicize the construction in the same way that embarrassed Vice President Joe Biden. The Washington Post says the policy would amount to, quote, a don't ask, don't tell policy for settlements. If confirmed, the proposals would contradict a plan endorsed by the U.S. earlier today. In a statement, the Middle East Quartet of the U.S., Russia, the UN, and the European Union called for an Israeli settlement freeze and the establishment of a Palestinian state within the next 2 years. Meanwhile, in Israel and the occupied territories, the Israeli government has launched new attacks on the Gaza Strip. A series of Israeli missiles hit Gaza overnight, wounding at least 2 Palestinians. The strikes follow a Palestinian rocket attack that killed a foreign guest worker inside Israel. Militants called the rocket fire a retaliation for the ongoing Israeli crackdown on West Bank protests. On Thursday, a group of Palestinian children were detained after throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers. An unidentified resident of Hebron said Israeli troops had taken his son.
My children were playing soccer in front of the house, and they came again, and they took them, and they said they were throwing stones. They say they have pictures of them throwing stones. The army are liars.
The Obama administration is criticizing Russia for announcing plans to finish construction of a long-delayed civilian nuclear power plant in Iran. Speaking during a visit to Russia, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the U.S. opposes Russia's assistance with the plant.
We have consistently said that Iran is entitled to civil nuclear power. it is a nuclear weapons program that it is not entitled to. And if it reassures the world or if its behavior is changed because of international sanctions, then they can pursue peaceful civil nuclear power. In the absence of those reassurances, we think it would be premature to go forward with any project at this time because we want to send an unequivocal message to the Iranians.
During her stay in Russia, Clinton also took part in talks on reducing the number of U.S. and Russian nuclear warheads under a new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START. Both sides say they're at the finish line in reaching a major agreement. In Afghanistan, the U.S. military says it's in the early stages of a major new offensive in the southern Afghan city of Kandahar. U.S. forces have begun securing key areas ahead of an intensified military assault expected in the coming weeks. A Guatemalan court has approved an order to extradite former Guatemalan President Alfonso Portillo to the United States on money laundering charges. A federal grand jury indicted Portillo for allegedly using U.S. banks to embezzle millions of dollars taken from Guatemalan coffers. Portillo, however, says he's the target of a political witch hunt dating back to his opposition to the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq.
I'm glad to tell Guatemalans I'm being chased for political reasons, for not allowing U.S. policies in Latin America. I was the only Central American president who didn't sign the letter supporting the U.S. war and invasion in Iraq, and my argument was that my country had already been invaded in the past, and signing a letter to support another country's invasion was against my principles. I remember the ambassador and consular's words at the time. Revenge will come in the future, and the extradition request is the instrument of revenge.
Portillo's lawyers are appealing the extradition order. The Guardian of London's reporting former Prime Minister Tony Blair has received payments from a South Korean oil firm with extensive oil interests in the U.S. and Iraq. The company, UI Energy Corporation, hired Blair around the same time its Iraqi consortium struck a controversial oil deal with the autonomous Kurdish government. Blair denies his dealings with the company were linked to Iraq. The arrangement was kept under wraps for 20 months after Blair convinced a British government committee it should be kept secret due to, quote, market sensitivities. Back in the United States, activists opposed to mountaintop removal coal mining held a protest Thursday outside the Washington offices of the Environmental Protection Agency. 6 protesters chained themselves to 20-foot-tall tripods underneath a banner reading, EPA pledged to end mountaintop removal in 2010. The protesters are calling on EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson to pledge to survey firsthand the environmental damage caused by mountaintop mining in the Appalachia Valley. The EPA, meanwhile, has announced it'll conduct a national study on how the natural gas drilling practice known as hydraulic fracturing is affecting the nation's water supply. The $1.9 million study will be carried out over 2 years. The study comes amidst a push by natural gas companies to expand fracking, including a proposal to drill inside the Marcellus Shale watershed, which supplies drinking water to millions of people in New York City and other Northeast states. In Montana, a federal judge has approved a landmark settlement to suspend oil and gas leases pending an environmental assessment. Under the deal, the Bureau of Land Management will suspend 61 leases on over 38,000 acres within 90 days. The oil field operations will then have to pass a series of environmental reviews before they can be resumed. 2 people were arrested outside the White House Thursday in a protest against the military's ban on openly gay service members. The 2 handcuffed themselves to a portion of the White House fence after a rally calling for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. One of those arrested was Lieutenant Dan Choi, an openly gay service member who's faced discharge since publicly defying Don't Ask, Don't Tell 1 year ago. And Arizona has become the first state to eliminate its children's health insurance program, known as S-CHIP, leaving tens of thousands without coverage. On Thursday, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer signed a new budget canceling the program, which covered around 47,000 low-income children. The move will coincide with cuts to Medicaid coverage for childless adults, dropping an additional 310,000 people from the rolls. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, Democracy